Hi guys, welcome to the Metasploit Mega Primer on Security Tube. So you must be wondering why I have called this a Mega Primer. Well, the reason being that the whole idea is to go ahead and cover Metasploit in a very comprehensive way and make a large number of videos on this topic. So the objective of this training is to actually provide a comprehensive coverage of the Metasploit framework. At the very same time, we are going to begin right from the basics, then move on to intermediate usage, and then finally advanced usage. This entire video series will include how to do pen testing, vulnerability assessment, information gathering, etc. with Metasploit, and will also cover advanced topics like writing Metasploit scripts and extending the framework using the Ruby language. We will also look at a quick primer on the Ruby language itself. Now, as you can imagine, this whole series is going to be at least 15 to 20 videos long, and this is where I would want your proactive feedback in the comment section below. So please let me know how you find each and every video I am posting and what you would like to see in the next set of videos. Attribution. Well, a lot of photographs and many of these information which I'll be talking about have been picked up from blogs, from the official Metasploit documentation, as well as from the Metasploit Unleashed tutorial by Offensive Security. So this is an attribution I'd like to give before I begin this series. Okay, part 1. In this first part, we will look at understanding exploitation and the need for a framework like Metasploit. Okay, so we'll start off by understanding a couple of basic terms. The first of which is vulnerability. Well, simply put, a vulnerability is a weakness which allows an attacker to break into and compromise a system's security. The second would be exploit, which is actually a code which allows an attacker to take advantage of a vulnerable system. Finally, payload, which is the actual code which runs on the system after exploitation. So let's take a very simple analogy to understand what we mean by these three different terms. So let's consider that there is a house, but unfortunately it has a very weak lock which can be easily opened using different combination of keys. So the vulnerability here is that the house has a lock which can be easily opened or broken into. So this is the vulnerability. Second comes in the exploit. Now in this analogy, think of a robber who basically wants to rob this house and has a set of keys which he knows if he tries, one of them will go ahead and break into this house by opening the lock. So this is what we mean by an exploit. The set of keys the hacker has using which he knows he can break the lock is what is an exploit. Finally, after a hacker breaks in, well, he can go ahead and do a lot of things. He can probably just leave the door open, have a look inside and leave, or he can go ahead and steal the money which is there in the house, or he can go ahead and steal electronic equipment or many other things. Well, what he decides to do after he has exploited the vulnerability is what is called the payload, right? So very simple analogy. Now let's translate this to the computer world. So on a more serious note, there is a vulnerable computer and an attacker. The attacker goes ahead and tries to exploit this vulnerability by sending an exploit and payload combination. If the computer is vulnerable, the exploit runs first. If the exploit succeeds, then the payload runs next. Once this happens, the attacker takes control of the computer and can do a variety of things, including downloading data, probably uploading malware, installing rootkit, and many other things. So the whole idea is that if there is a vulnerability, and if there is an exploit which can go ahead and exploit the vulnerability, then a hacker has a choice of payload he wants to run. Now let's go ahead and take an example. Right? RPC DCOM had a vulnerability which was very well documented in MS03026. Also, a freely available exploit and payload was available. So let's quickly have a look at both of these. So this is the vulnerability which is described in the Microsoft Security Bulletin. And this specifically says buffer overrun in RPC interface could allow code execution. Well, this is the vulnerability. There's also a lot of technical description available for the vulnerability, right? As to what is the issue because of which the buffer overrun can happen, etc., etc. Now, this is the exploit code, and the payload is also bundled with this exploit code which was released. So if you notice, if people who are actually new to vulnerability research might notice a lot of interesting hex values. Well, this is what is called shell code, using which exploits are actually written. And then we also have a payload. So in this case, seems like the payload is binding to port 4444. So it's quite a lengthy program in which a network connection is made, exploit is sent. If the exploit succeeds, then the payload runs, which actually binds to a remote port, and the program tries to connect to that remote port, right? So let's go back to our presentation now. And the next thing we'll do is look at an actual demo of this vulnerability. So what we've done is we have a Windows machine running XP, which is vulnerable to the attack described in the Microsoft Security Bulletin. We also have an instance of Backtrack running on a separate virtual machine. Both uses VirtualBox, right? Now what I've done is, so that we can illustrate this well on a much more larger screen, I have connected PuTTY to the Backtrack instance. So basically we are logged into this Backtrack instance using PuTTY, right? So now what we'll do is, let's quickly go and look at the exploit code we just downloaded. So this is the exploit code we also had a look at on the web right now, which can exploit the MS03, I think 026 vulnerability, right? So what we'll do is, let's compile the exploit code. Gives us as warnings, no problem. Let's try and run the exploit code so that we know what are the different inputs to give. So first is the target ID. Well, in this case, it is a Windows XP machine. There is no service pack. So let me go ahead and give it option number 5. And then the target IP address. So let's quickly go to our Windows instance, login, and have a look at the IP address. Right, we use the ipconfig command and it seems to be 1.36. Let's go back here, give it the IP address, right, and let's run the exploit. Awesome. So if you notice, what happened was the exploit, depending on whatever was the version of Windows, used a particular return address and then was able to exploit, and it is now giving us a system shell on this remote computer, right? Cool. So now we can do a lot of amazing things once we have remote shell. Let me give you an example. What I'll do is, let me actually change directory right to the desktop, And if you notice right now, we are on the desktop, right? So what I'll do is I'll quickly go ahead and just create a simple directory called hacked. Also, I might choose to leave a text file which has the word hacked written inside it. Now, if I go back to my VM instance, you'd immediately notice that a directory called hack is created and basically a file called hacked is also created. Anyway, great. So what we've done here is that we have successfully gone ahead and exploited the RPC DCOM vulnerability present on this Windows XP instance, and our exploit was able to break in a payload executed which basically bound a shell to port number 4444, and then we connected to that shell, and from that is where we are running all these commands. Now let's go ahead and exit this program and go back to our presentation. Anyway, one of the interesting things you would notice is that the moment we exit, the system automatically starts rebooting. Well, this is because once we exit, what really happens is the cleanup code in the current exploit is not very good, because of which actually the whole RPC service itself crashes and the system has to reboot, because RPC is an essential service. Anyway, we'll allow the system to reboot. In the meantime, let's go back to our presentation. Right? So we saw a demo of the RPC DCOM exploit using the actual exploit C code against a Windows XP vulnerable to the RPC DCOM vulnerability. Let's move on now. Now, if you're interested in actually learning how to write exploit code, then here are a couple of pointers. On SecurityTube itself, I've actually created an assembly language primer, which will definitely be required if you want to dive deep into the world of exploitation. Also, I've created buffer overflow and format string primers, which take you to great detail and depth of how to write buffer overflows and format string vulnerabilities. Right? You can search for these tutorials on the site, you would find them. If you're interested more in text tutorials, then this link definitely provides a very good reading material. And then finally, the book, The Shell Coder's Handbook Discovering and Exploiting Security Holes, is also a very good book which you can buy and read, right? Anyway, so we went ahead and executed this exploit. Well, here are the challenges in just using such individual exploit programs. First of all, there are dozens of exploits available. So if one has to manage, regularly keep updating, as well as customize all these exploits before he goes for a vulnerability assessment or a penetration testing, as you can imagine, it is a nightmare, right? At the very same time, the exploit which we used already had just a remote TCP bind shell payload already put into it. Now, let's say instead of a remote TCP bind, maybe we just wanted to execute a command which created a new user. Well, in order to do that, we would have to change the entire payload. And at times this requires a lot of skill as well as is quite time consuming. So going ahead and actually changing payloads very fast for the same exploit might not be possible if you try to do everything yourself, right from scratch. So testing and exploit research itself becomes tedious without a framework which actually enables us to do all these things in a very fast and efficient way. Because the only other way would be reinventing the wheel, and as all of us know, that is not something we would want to do. Well, so in order to address all these challenges, enter Metasploit. Metasploit is going to help us solve all of these challenges. So what is the Metasploit framework? Well, it is a tool for developing and testing vulnerabilities and can be used for penetration testing, exploit research, as well as developing IDS signatures. We will look at all of these different uses in video tutorials, which we will view later. Some history about Metasploit. It was started by H.D. Moore in 2003 and recently, as most of you are aware, was acquired by Rapid7. At this very same time, it remains open source and free for use even post acquisition. The Metasploit framework is written in Ruby, and I think it is also the largest program ever written in Ruby, right? Okay, so Metasploit framework for pen testing. This is the first use of Metasploit we will look at. The framework has over 600 tested exploits and over 200 different payloads to choose from and over 27 encoders. Metasploit practically offers you plug and play as far as going ahead and matching payloads with exploits is concerned. This alone is a huge advantage. Why? Because given the same RPC decom exploit, we can actually change the payload very fast and try out different payloads on the remote vulnerable machine. Along with this, there are tons of other features which we'll probably reserve for later videos. So let's quickly look at a demo of the RPC decom exploit using Metasploit. So this is our vulnerable Windows machine. Let me quickly log in once again. And now let's go back here. So we are just running the MSF console program, which is a way to access the Metasploit framework. Well, it takes a little bit of time because Metasploit loads all the, I think, 1,000 odd modules at the same time. And this is what causes the delay a little bit. But don't worry, it will be well worth your time. Okay, so don't worry about a bunch of commands I'm going to be typing in right now, because later I'm going to take you through the basics of each and every command, as well as MSF console, how it can be used, everything, right? So just follow. The whole point of this part of the video is just to show you with what ease you can conduct the same attack using Metasploit. So the first thing I just do is quickly search for decom. Now this will list all the modules which have the pattern decom in them. Great. So if you notice, the Microsoft RPC decom interface overflow, this is what we are looking at, is available as an exploit. So we'll go ahead, use this exploit. Let me clear the screen. And then we'll quickly look at the different options we need to fill up. So by default, the target port or the remote port has been filled up. We need to figure out the target host. We quickly set the target host to be 192.168.1.37, which, if I remember correctly, is what my Windows machine IP address was. Let me quickly check that. Okay, it was 36. Right. Now the next thing we are going to do is set a payload. So if you hit a tab, basically it will show you all possible payload options we have. So right now, let me very quickly just go ahead and add a new user. So if I go ahead and look at the different options I need to fill up. So by default, the username which is going to be created will be Metasploit and password will also be Metasploit, right? There's only one exploit target available, which is great because it's a universal target, which is going to work for practically everything. So that's cool. So now let's go ahead and exploit the remote machine by just typing in exploit. Now you'll notice that the exploit was sent and completed. Well, no session was created because the payload which we used just went ahead and created a new user, hopefully. So let's verify this. Let's go ahead, log off, and let's see. Awesome. If you notice, now a new user called Metasploit has been created. And if you remember, the password was also Metasploit. Great. Right? So as you can clearly see, using Metasploit, it was so easy to first find the exploit, just put up some basic settings like a remote host, and then choose a payload of our choice, run the exploit and have the payload execute. Also, if you notice, the machine has not crashed remotely. Why? Well, because all the exploits in Metasploit have been tested quite a lot to ensure that such remote crashes, etc., do not happen. Awesome. So let's go back to our presentation. So now we saw a quick demo of the RPC decom exploit using Metasploit. Well, to conclude this video, you can go and download Metasploit from their website. It is available for Linux, Unix, and Windows-based systems. Take your pick, whatever you're comfortable with, and install it. In the next video, we will actually go through the basics of Metasploit and how to use it, right? So one quick request to people who've at least watched till the end, hopefully all of you have watched till the end. I would really appreciate if you could leave a comment behind of what you thought about this video, whether good or bad. I'm open to criticism because I want to improve on the quality of videos I can put up on SecurityTube. So I would really request, please leave a comment behind, and also please leave behind topics on Metasploit which you would want me to cover in this video series. Well, that's all for this video. Thank you very much. Have a great day ahead.